This is again a broad topic, but it was one of the subtitles of this whole symposium, and that is the evolution of human consciousness within human consciousness within evolutionary framework. And I'm wondering if we can just have some discussion. To me, it feels like a time of tremendous awakening and change, and just talking specifically about human consciousness within that framework. Which is a very big framework, I realize.
Kick off with something brief. I mean, consciousness, as we're talking about it here, doesn't evolve. Kashi's been saying it is the witness. It doesn't change. It doesn't evolve. So what we're really talking about is the evolution of human thinking, human values, human attitudes, beliefs, decisions, all of that. That's what we're talking about. And I think there is something happening on the planet at this time that is special in this regard. And that is that we are collectively honing in on what is the essence of all the great spiritual traditions, which has never been possible before in human history. You were born into your particular culture and you had your particular spiritual tradition and your priests or saints or whatever, if you were lucky. Maybe you weren't and you had your particular scriptures. What we have today is, through all different sorts of information media, books, videos, television, the internet, webinars, we have access to all the world's spiritual teachings, and not only in the present time, but we can go back. We've been talking a lot about Vedanta, the Upanishads. If you were in the Bahamas 100 years ago, you wouldn't have had that. So we have this global access to spirituality, and we are beginning to, I think, strip away the clothing that each one's got dressed in. I think what's happened is a teacher has a deep awakening, realization, whatever you want to call it, and sees the value of that, and obviously wants to start sharing that with people around him or her. And inevitably the people around don't see things quite as clearly because they're students, and they may not pick up some bits, may misunderstand bits, forget bits. But as things get passed on, it's like the purity gradually gets clouded, and the teaching begins to, I think, absorb some of the trappings of the culture. And the result is we end up with many different spiritual traditions which on the surface look very different. And then we argue about them and fight over them and get into all that silly stuff. I think what is happening today is we are taking away those layers step by step, collectively. We're beginning to first of all ask, and then see what is that core, what is that essence. And I think that's part of what's happening here. And that is coming at a time in our history when we most need that. Because, as has been pointed out many times, ultimately the root cause of so many of our problems is not knowing our true nature, being identified with the ego mind, however you want to put it, sense of a separate self. That's the underlying cause, and we've been trying to patch up what's going wrong rather than looking at what is the root cause. And so that collective honing in and awakening to the essence of the spiritual teaching is coming at the time at which it is most needed on the planet, which seems a lovely, perfect match. So that's what I see is happening.
So we do live in a special time, but we also should be aware that perhaps this is not a linear evolution. I'm talking about human societies. It has happened before, and I use the example, or I use the metaphor of a cyclical, more of a cyclical time. And that does fit a little bit perhaps better with some of the things we know from science today. Why am I saying that? It's because even within the human consciousness, perhaps it's not an evolution in the sense of something changing into something new, but actually rediscovering what is already there. So I think we touch upon the idea, or Swami Kashi talked about Vidya and avidya, and I think we all touch upon that. So the true knowledge is eternal, has always been there, and the teachers take birth, as it says in Bhagavad Gita, when it's needed to destroy ignorance, not to destroy any enemies, but to destroy ignorance and bring forth the light of consciousness. So from that point of view, perhaps a new way of looking at evolution is rediscovering what is already there rather than building on some sort of complexity that keeps going in some unknown fashion. And if that is the case, perhaps we can approach scientifically now, I'm talking about evolution in a different light. It's worth exploring, I think.
I want to stress the side of our responsibility of living in such a time. In the opening of the Vivekachudamani, Shankaracharya is opening by telling us that it is very rare to get a human birth, to be in a karmic theory. We are being born many times, but there are infinite number of souls waiting to be born, and we should not take it for granted. So it is very rare to have a human birth. Then he says it is even more rare to have exposure to these teachings. And even rarer than that is to have a teacher who can guide us. And then he says, if you somehow manage to get a human birth, to get access to these teachings, to find a good teacher, and you are not doing everything you can in order to realize your true nature, you are like a person committing suicide. It is a spiritual suicide because you worked for innumerable lifetimes in order to get to this point. As Peter said, where everything is so available. You can find the teachings, you can find the teachers. We have the means, we have the possibility. Now, all the responsibility is on our shoulders. And we should not be content with the situation we are in. Yes, there is some changes, some for the better, some for the worse, but it is still our responsibility to go through the evolution, to evolve. And then I would say that truly evolution is about the purity of the mind. Evolution is about the purity and clarity of the mind. The purer the mind is, the clearer the mind is, the more evolved we are. So it is not a Darwinistic evolution that we are talking about. We are talking here about spiritual evolution, which is actually, Swami Vivekananda called it involution. He says there is evolution process that we see in nature. There is also involution, which is basically the process of coming back to the source, going from where we are, going back to the source for where we are coming from, into our real nature. And this is a process of undoing rather than a process of doing, of evolving. This is evolution of returning back to the source. So maybe it's another way to think about it.
This is a question regarding worldview. Several times during the discussions, I've heard the statements from panel and participants that we are living in challenging times. It's chaotic out there. The world is evolving in a negative way. I want to hear your view on that, because it seems to me, actually I have the total opposite view. It seems to me that we are taught to love ourselves with our challenges. We are taught to have compassion for our next, the people next to us, to accept their shortcomings. And I personally think we should take that same attitude towards the entire world. And I see so many good things happening. And I think we are infusing ourselves with negativity when we are holding all the events too clearly. I mean, too much in the center of our attention instead of focusing on what is also good. So I'd like to hear your views on that.
Well, I will just say that I really agree with what you say. And it was studied, the level of violence and the number of wars in the history of mankind. And now we are in the least violence that history ever knew, and the least number of wars that ever were. So we are going in the right direction, it seems. It is only that our media is emphasizing just the other side, and it appears to be overwhelming. Whereas in the past, either there was no media, or even the media that was there was bent on other things. So yeah, I agree with you, and it is good to see the positive side of our times.
I guess the question is, again, returning back to doership in some level, because it's a good one. If we are operating from a place of being more self-realized, and people in aggregate there are more people on the planet who are self-realized, I'd love to hear you thread out what would be some of the qualities of our behavior and our decision making that indicates that self-realization in the context of a modern society when we're not in our spiritual homes.
You're asking me?
Yes.
Why? I would say take a very general perspective on that, because I don't think we can ever predict specifics. As soon as you start predicting specifics, every prediction turns out to be wrong, more or less. But I think we can look at general trends. And the way I would look at it is to say, what's come up again and again is that the lack of self-realization, self-knowledge, however you want to put it, the lack of that leads us to function out of fear, out of wanting to be in control of things, taking from the world around, including other people, for our own ends, that looking after our own ends. So what you're really asking is, what would a world be like where that had dissolved or was dissolving? So you're asking, what would a world be like in which people weren't responding to each other out of fear? And which is really, how would the world be if people were responding to each other out of love? because there's so many, it comes up again and again, fear, love is the opposite of fear. But I don't see it so much as the opposite is fear covers up the love, fear veils the love. I think as we remove the obstacles to love's presence, as the Course in Miracles says, as we remove the obstacles to love's presence, then that begins to shine through into our lives more. And the same with control, as the seeds of the control begin to dissipate, then there's going to be less abuse going on, and more moving with what is being required of us from the situation we find ourselves in. So and then the question is, what would a world look like in which people were coming much more from love, compassion, responding to the situation at hand? I don't know. We can each paint our own picture, I think. But I just go for that general principle. It would be a world in which that was the undercurrent, rather than the egoic, fear, materialistic mode that we're now in as a dominant mode. I mean, I'm not saying, of course we're not. There's a lot of people, we are coming from love. It's not, but coming from that more than we are now. That's how I would frame it.
We are made of love, and we are already realized. So the task, as was said this morning, is to understand who we are in terms of having this attitude of doership or being in the world, and what our true nature is. Because our true nature, whether we know it or not, whether we accept it or not, it's always there. So it's not a matter of going and finding it and say, oh, here it is, now I got it. It's just realizing. In fact, the word self-realization really means realizing who you already are. Now, having said that, if that is our premise, then the hard work is, of course, again and again and again. Those mountaineers who climb high mountains, and in fact, in any human activity, they share that you have the goal, let's say to reach Mount Everest or whatever, but then the hard work happens. And in today's society, we tend to say, oh, I want it right now, just like that. Ignoring the steps that it takes to climb 29,000 feet or whatever it is. And they're not easy. But on the other hand, knowing that you're already there, and this is again the complementarity principle I was talking before. It's a driver once the ego says, okay, I'm not happy with what I have. And so the unhappiness that we were talking about before actually has a positive element in the sense that the mind doesn't want to give up of a seeker. Comes back again and again. So they're both needed. The understanding that we are the self, but then the responsibility, and this is to ourselves and to the ones around us and to the new generation. I would say particularly the new generation. As a teacher, I feel a huge responsibility to pass on what was given to me, really, didn't come from me, pass it on to the next generations. And so the responsibility is there. But at the same time, maybe we take it easy. We say, well, actually, I'm always a self. And so what deviates me from that understanding? And then once we understand what deviates us, then we can go after it in a positive way. Say, okay, this is not really who I really want to be, because I'm already that. So theory, if you like, in science we have theory and practice. You can have practice without a theory. And you cannot have theory without practice. You have one of those two things, then science is lame. It's not good. Become too theoretical, then you're off into some universe over there and it doesn't really mean anything. And if you're just gathering random data without a clear picture, it's also not going anywhere because there's no vision, there's no direction. So the direction is, I am that, I know that, and even if I don't come from that space every day, little by little, little by little, little by little. Very practical.
Okay. You were asking what will happen if people will be more self-realized. That's how you phrased your question. And regarding this, I wanted to say that there are no grades in self-realization. It is like asking what happens if people start to see the snake a little bit more like a rope and a little less like a snake. There's no such a thing. Either you see the snake or you see the rope. So there's no question of gradation in self-realization. So if I may, I will rephrase your question. And the question is about level of purity. It is a level of purity of the heart. And what will happen when people will act from a place of more purity? And the answer is that they will care more for one another. And that will be wonderful. Regarding self-realization, in the Bhagavad Gita, towards the end of the second chapter, Arjuna is asking Krishna, Stita pragyasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava stita dhikim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. Arjuna is asking Krishna regarding the description of the Stita Pragya. Stita Pragya is one who is based or established in wisdom. Or in other words, we can say a self-realized being. What is his description? What can you tell about him? And the answer is coming in 18 verses. We will not go to them, but always when Krishna answers in the Gita, the first thing he says is the most important one. And here also he says, Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan. Says, for when a person is rooted in wisdom, that person's desires are gone. His desires are completely gone. And basically, what the problems we see around us in the world are coming from selfish desires. This is where conflict is created, because my benefit is going to be affected by your benefit, therefore I have to fight over this. We are misunderstanding the mechanism of happiness. We don't understand how happiness works. Can I hijack the discussion for 10 minutes? Because it will be very helpful to understand how happiness works. Normally, when we examine happiness, it looks very simple and very clear. I want something, I get it, I'm happy. Therefore, happiness came from the object. Example, I want chocolate, I love chocolate, I want a piece of chocolate. I don't have a chocolate, I'm miserable. And then I go to the boutique, I buy chocolate, I eat, and I'm happy. So what is my conclusion? The chocolate makes me happy, right? This is a normal reasoning. Philosophically, it doesn't hold very well, because to say that chocolate makes me happy, it means that happiness is a property of chocolate. It is like saying that fire makes me warm, feel warmth. because heat is property of fire, right? So if chocolate makes me happy, it means that happiness is a property of chocolate. The problem with this is double. First of all, if chocolate makes me happy, it should always make me happy, just as fire always makes me feeling heat. But we know that after the 5th bar of chocolate, it doesn't make me very happy. Actually, it makes me miserable. The same chocolate. Therefore, we see that chocolate doesn't have this quality. Not only that, the second thing is that if chocolate has the property of happiness, it should make everybody happy. Just as fire make everybody warm. It is not that fire make you cool and make me warm. Everyone who gets near fire gets heat, because heat is a property of fire. But happiness is not a property of chocolate, because I like chocolate, but you may not like chocolate. Okay? So where is happiness coming from? If it is not coming from the object, why do I experience only when I get this object? What is happening and where is it coming from? The Advaita Vedanta philosophy is going a very different direction of this. It says happiness is your true nature. That consciousness that we have discussed in the last 2 sessions, this consciousness is pure bliss. This is happiness is just a pale representation of that which is my own true nature. This is who am I in reality. And that reality is of the nature of pure bliss. This is who am I. How do we see it? We see it because the search for happiness, for love, for contentment, for peace is universal. Nothing else is universal. Not everybody likes chocolate. Not everybody wants children. Not everybody likes the same people. But everybody wants to be happy. Why? Because it is our nature. And consciously or unconsciously, we are trying to regain our nature. We are trying to go back to experience what is our own self, our property, which is pure bliss. We are searching it. We don't know. Now there is something which is disturbing or distorting or blocking the vision of my true nature, and therefore I'm not experiencing that bliss, which is my true nature. What is that covering? What is that cover that blocks the vision of my own self for me? This is what we call the mind or desires. We are coming back to this verse. Prajati yada kaman sarvangata manopartan. When all the desires have been mashed away. An analogy that can explain it is the analogy of the clouds covering the sun. In a cloudy day, we don't see the sun. We say today there is no sun. Everybody knows that the sun is there, but we don't see it because it is blocked by clouds. Actually, we can see the clouds only by the light of the sun, but still they are blocking the vision of the sun. And then the wind blows, scatters the clouds a little bit. There is an opening and the sun appears. We say, hey, wonderful, the sun has come. Sun has not come. It is only that the wind blew a little bit, the clouds, scattered them, and now we can see the sun which is already there. And then the same wind that scattered the clouds is continue to blow and bringing new clouds, and again I'm not able to see the sun. This is the analogy. The sun stands for my true nature, for the self, for that consciousness which is of the nature of bliss. This is who am I. I am that bliss which I am searching for. But this bliss is covered by clouds. These clouds are the impurities in the mind. These clouds are the desires that are assaulting me in the mind. So many desires are there. Some of them gross, I'm able to see them. Some of them are very subtle, under the radar of the mind. I'm not able to see them, but they are affecting everything I do, every moment. And because of this, I'm so discontent, I'm not able to experience my true nature. So what I do? I fulfill desires. Fulfilling desires is like blowing the wind on the clouds. It scatters the clouds. When I fulfill a desire, maybe not chocolate, maybe a big desire, when I'm a childless for 35 years and then finally I get a child, I'm so happy. I'm feeling that this little baby is the source of my happiness. Basically, if we care to stop and observe at that particular moment our own mind, we will see that what happens is that at this moment, the mind becomes calm. The mind becomes peaceful. All these desires that are constantly there, of which I'm aware of and others which I'm not aware of, they are all temporarily out of the way. What happens when they are out of the way? My true nature is able to express itself. Finally, I'm experiencing myself. At that time, there are no desires. When I'm holding this little baby which was born and I'm so happy and so, I won't care for what somebody says, for what somebody do. Normally, I will get very annoyed if somebody tell me, you are an idiot. I will get very upset. But when I'm there and somebody tell me, look at you, you're just an idiot, I say, thank you. And I continue to be happy. I don't care. I don't have all this stuff. It's not there. It is clear that I'm experiencing my true nature. The problem is that, as we all know and we all experience it, that too soon, new clouds are coming and covering again the sky. And again, I'm in the same place, probably in a worse place. Because the more desires I fulfill, I find myself with even greater number of desires. We know it. Look in our culture. How many desires we have? 15 years ago, how many of us had a desire for a smartphone? Now, can you live 5 minutes without your smartphone? Is it something liberating or is it something binding? We see the more we have, the more desires we have, the more clouds we have, the less we are able to see our true nature. So you are asking what happens when we purify our hearts, when more and more people on earth will purify their mind? I don't need to answer. It is clear, right? When more and more people will clear their mind, this place will be a nicer place to live in.
It's not a question, just a little addition to what Swami Muktananda came across the word of purification. If we look at the practices that are offered in a place like this, other practices, like what is the purification? So when we're doing the chanting morning and evening, it works on the subconscious and beyond. It is purifying. When you're doing the asanas, the stretching your body, the energy is moving better, and blockages that are in our energy body are being purified. When we stick to a more sattvic or more pure diet, it affects the mind. Any of these practices, and I'm sure that there are other practices from where you come, there are parts of the process of purification, and I'm sure that most of you may have the experience of coming out from a very good yoga class, very good relaxation. We not only don't we run to breakfast, we don't even want to get up from the yoga mat because something is moving there. So even that natural desire of the body can be, just there for a moment. So to bring these concepts and this inner yearning to meet that place or to find the place where we're longing for, these kind of practices are ways through which we can get closer and closer and have more experience of that place. And one of the things that in the Gita is said about the yogi, it's not external, but one of the things of that yogi that has realized is titiksha. He is completely balanced in the opposites. Something exciting, he's very balanced. Something that is difficult, he's balanced. So his vision is very different, and the more of us can reach there, of course, it will affect all of us. Thank you.
I'm interested in whether you could say a little bit about how
your experiences of groups that are like communities like this that are practicing together, and that collective effect on self realization, in a bigger way. I mean, I know we hear the about Buddhist monks practicing together, and people will say that has a profound impact. And I just wonder if there are examples, any you might point to, of ways you've seen that, I guess, collective energy manifesting.
Maybe just one answer to that. I'm sure there's other answers. There was some fascinating research done 30 years ago now with TM, Transcendental Meditation, where they would take a group of people, 1,000, maybe a couple of thousand people, put them into a location in a city or something, and just have them doing deep retreat meditation. They were just there meditating, most of the day for several weeks, and they looked at things like crime rates in the area, hospital admissions, various parameters, and the changes were remarkable. So remarkable that everybody said they must be fudging the results. This can't be true. People didn't believe it. And yet, they did the experiment in such a way that it was rigorous. The way they collected the data was rigorous. It really was remarkable. I mean, I say it was so remarkable that people would just react and say, no, it can't be true. That's just one example. No, they were just meditate. Well, yes, with the intention of quietening the mind, coming back, touching into true nature, but just that pure meditation. It wasn't an intention to change anything. It was just to see the collective effect of group meditation on the society around.
I would say that every night or every morning when we chant collectively, you can feel the change of the energy, right? And when the chanting really is going, so at a very practical level, we see it all around us. Now, there's no collection of data there, but of course we know. And it is a little bit harder, at least from my perspective, to chant alone. You can do it, you can repeat the mantra alone, but in terms of chanting, it's much more multiplier effect if we all chant together.
Yeah, I mentioned briefly before about mental space, that it is different than physical space. And this is in our tradition, the belief that thoughts are objects within this mental space, and they affect, just as physical objects affect physical space, the mental objects affect mental space, and we know it. For this reason, in our tradition, we put a lot of emphasis on what we call satsanga, association with right, I would say association with saints, preferably secondary association with like-minded people. Because in the presence of such people, our sadhana, our practice becomes a lot easier and is supported. So we see it everywhere. When we enter the museum, automatically our mind becomes quite respectful. When we enter the prayer house, automatically our mind becomes more devotional and tuned to it. When we enter the pub, our mind becomes tuned to that also. So that shows the different spaces carry with them different energy that has to do with thoughts that were repeatedly generated in that particular environment. There are places of meditation, for example, in Sri Ramana Ashram in Tiruvannamalai in India. It is a place that for probably from the 1940s, in that particular room, people came just to sit and meditate. Every day, all day, there are people sitting and meditating there. Just go and sit there, you will understand exactly. You don't need, just go and sit there. It is unbelievable.
I just wanted to follow up on Swami's mention that the mind is considered to be matter, but there are 5 parts that are imperceivable. And I thought maybe you could go over those 5 parts and then have Menas explain in a quantum physics point of view what they are.
Well, basically, these are not 5 parts, these are the 5 elements. We are talking about earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or space. And these are not names of substances, these are names of principles. So, for example, earth is the principle of solidity. It is cold in nature. It is not moving. It is dry. Water, for example, is the principle of fluidity. It is cold by nature. Fire is hot by nature. Like this, these are 5 principles that are operating on different levels, on gross level and on subtle level. So on the subtle level, we call them the tanmatras. At that time, we say they are in the pure form. Okay? And in later on, they undergo a grossification process. We call it panchikarana. In English, it is called, it has a very interesting word. I don't remember. It is a special process by which they mix together and they become gross, and they manifest as the 5 gross elements that are responsible for what we call nature. Okay? Now we will hear about the real thing.
Certainly, the quantum physics doesn't address those 5 elements, but there are elements, of course, in physics. I would say that before we talked about the principles or universal principles, I think this is what Swami Muktananda is saying here. We can consider them as organizing principles that are at different levels. So, as we just heard, there are the subtle level, and then there can be a little bit more gross level or more solidified level. So from that point of view, in terms of quantum theory, it does make sense because they are cutting across different levels. And by the way, when we say principles and when we say laws, I believe there's actually an infinite number of them. It's not that we just have a finite number and somehow if we discover those, we'll understand the nature of reality. But they are tied again to acts of willful observations that take place by observers who are conscious beings but actually act in this world. And they have the qualities, in this case, the solidification quality or the liquidity quality, that are behind what we are observing, in the sense of, so say, oh, this object here is actually made of various qualities, right? It is metallic. If you drop it, it does not break, as you were saying before. You can put water in it, and it will not leak water. You can put it in fire, and it will last. It will not burn. It will not break unless you raise the temperature to 2,000 degrees or whatever it is. So these qualities, sometimes we call them laws, but they're really always tied to choices of observation and specific acts of observation performed in the laboratory. So from that point of view, they're very much part of the quantum world. Okay, that's how I would put it.
Not relating to this question, just to, if you are interested, there is a non-profit organization that is called heartmath.org. They've been doing different practices that are drawn from all the teachings, but putting it in a much easier way to work with, experience, and teach, and they're teaching it in many, many setups like schools and policemen and cops and so on. Different techniques that they have to do with the focus and bringing a positive or gratitude and focusing on the heart as a focal point. For some reason, they discovered that even breathing in a minute or two to the heart center, it entrains the brain and it shifts the whole fight or flight. And they are also engaged in a planetary project. They have put on 14 places on the planet some gadgets that can actually measure when different things are happening to see. We know that the Mother Earth is, influencing us, but to what extent we can influence the other way around. And they have a lot of material, beautiful material on their website. It is called Heart Math, like mathematics of the heart.org. So just if you want to explore this sense, they have a lot of, they are researching quite a bit of it and teaching and giving these tools.
I understand that you're saying about the clouds and the sun. What would you say to someone who sees their ego, sees that it's an illusion, sees that it's killing that person, and that measuring up to this desired person that he can't ever become is also killing him? And that every desire for an external validation is a further extension of the ego and is an illusion. And so that the knowledge is there, or I guess the awareness is there that this is all an illusion. The body, the mind, the doer, like I understand intellectually how that it's an illusion. It's not the consciousness, that's all an illusion of the mind. What would you say to someone who has the burning desire to not identify with that and to have that disintegrate, but still can't, and is dying spiritually, like you were saying, spiritual suicide, because you can't get past it? If you have the awareness and you have the desire, what then needs to be the application?
Okay. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is asking a very similar question. He's asking Krishna, what is that causing a person who knows what is right to do and wants to do the right thing to do something else? Did it ever happen to you? Right? We know what we should do. We know that it is the right thing to do. And still, when we want to do the right thing, but still we do something else. Right? Krishna answers, Kama esha krodha esha rajo guna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapma vidyena miha vairinam. Krishna says, Kama esha krodha esha. This is desire and this is anger. Rajo guna samudbhava. It is born out of the guna called rajas. Mahashano mahapapma. This is the greatest, the greatest foe, the greatest enemy. Vidyena iha vairinam. You should know it to be your enemy in this battlefield. Arjuna is talking to Krishna in the battlefield. Then Arjuna imagines that the battlefield is the place of war. Krishna tells him, no, your real battlefield is right here. And this is the battlefield of your higher nature with your lower nature. It says your enemies are your desires and your anger. What is an anger? I would say that anger is a frustrated desire. When somebody or something stands in the way of the fulfillment of your desire, you get angry. Is it not? So desire is another, anger is another form of desire. The impurities of the heart, we call them, that are in our mind, this is what is preventing us from doing what is right for us. Now, from your question, I was not able to gather whether you are talking how one is doing for oneself, or you are talking about how to do somebody else to do it. If the question is for oneself, the answer is 3 words. This is Swami Vishnu used to say. 3 words. Practice, practice, practice. That's it. There is no other way. We need patience. We need to understand what is in front of us. Cultivate understanding is important, but at the end of the day is all about practice. If you are asking about somebody else that you want to tell them to stop them from harming themselves, you cannot. You can do it only in one way, by being a shining example. And then when you are a shining example of what you want to teach, they will come to you and ask. And then they will be listening. Otherwise, it is not possible.
Thank you for the question. Just a little addition. One of the main practices that were designed by Swami Sivananda, and Swami Vishnu was a good expert, and so is Swami Srupananda. In this lineage, the basic practice that can really take you a long way is karma yoga. Because when we say karma yoga, is the yoga of selfless service, but to reach the place of selflessness, just like we discussed in our little meeting, to make your daily events an opportunity of the practice. And a lot of patience is needed toward ourselves, and the topic of self-compassion was mentioned, so have self-compassion to the process of happening.
So I found it interesting to connect 2 dots that both Peter and Swami Kashi Muktananda said that meditation should have ease in it, if not inspiration. And so I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more about that. It strikes in other traditions, it's not that way. So I don't know, I just found that interesting that you both really stand by that.
I see in the most general way of talking about it, meditation, as we're conceiving of it here, is about allowing the mind to relax. And the ego is focused, it's got attention on something, it's got desire, it's got aversion, its very nature is to be tense. It's almost the hallmark of the ego. If you ever wonder whether you're in an egoic mode, just look inside and see whether you're feeling an inner tension in the mind or not. Because I think it's almost the hallmark of the ego. There's a slight tightening, a slight constriction of consciousness. And so meditation for me is allowing that to relax. Putting any effort into it is the ego getting involved again. It's like the ego is getting involved in the practice of meditation, trying to make the meditation work, thinking, oh, if I just did this, if I just tried harder, if I just worked on this, then I'd get somewhere. But it's not about getting anywhere. It's about allowing that tension of the egoic mode to relax so that we can begin to fall back into whatever we want to call it, being, true nature. And so for me, it's absolutely essential is that we practice without effort and taking out any effort when we see it.
My question is about manifestation. A couple of days ago, Peter explained that when he was first brought into these areas by as I understood it, a guru, this person was asking him, have you noticed an increased amount of synchronicity in your life? Last night you were talking about how consciousness is what matter is made of. So, and we know now from quantum physics that it also seems that there's existence depends on observation. So I'd like to, well, from my personal viewpoint, it seems to me that manifestation becomes more and more real in my own life, and I dare not really follow that, but I'd like to hear your views on that.
If I may make a small correction, existence does not depend on observation. Okay? Existence is being. The attributes of the world depend on observation. The attributes of quantum particles or properties of waves or whatever they are, they depend on observation, depend on what we call boundaries. There's always a boundary, and we talked about it the night when I talked that the boundaries are arbitrary, which really means that they are not there in some, from the point of view of the absolute consciousness. So I just wanted to clarify that existence itself does not depend on observation. It is the underlying reality that we call the Atman or the power Brahman. But then the properties that we see in the world are made by conscious observations of observers who think they are separate from each other.
This is probably another point of clarification for me. We say that matter is made of consciousness. Matter, as we know it, is a concept that exists only in our experience. And so it's in that sense that matter as we know it is constructed from consciousness, made from consciousness, just as everything we know is an appearance in consciousness. And that's all we ever know. The matter in the physical sense in the world out there, which is the world we actually never ever really know anything about, we can't even say that matter as we think of it exists out there. So I hear a lot of people sort of thinking that the matter in the world is made of consciousness, and then think, well, how's this chair made out of consciousness? It's made out of consciousness in our mind. What is going on in the out there, we don't really know. And I see it's something which comes up again and again when people start understanding the role of consciousness and the absolute role of consciousness in all of this. That they think that in the physical world the matter is made of consciousness. The truth is there is no matter in the outside world. There is consciousness. There is the play of consciousness, lila, unfolding in its own way, and we experience and interpret that as matter.
I didn't understand exactly what is the question, so I'm trying to. Yeah, I heard what you said, but I was not getting what is exactly the question. But I already said what I'm thinking about it, so yeah, I expressed. You have a particular specific question regarding it, or?
The question relates to whether you can cultivate manifestation as part of your practice.
Okay, so you are asking, since consciousness is at the basis of manifestation, can I choose the manifestation? For example, in my dream, when I have a lucid dream, people who practice lucid dreaming, once they get awake in the dream, they can, to some extent, control the dream world, right? They can create a house out of thin air within the dream. And we see that most of us, at least, cannot do such things while being awake. it doesn't work. If I want now to build a temple here, just by the power of my will, it will not happen. So in this sense, no, we cannot influence, and I think the reason is that, well, it's a little subtle. There is something which we call a universal mind versus personal mind or individual mind. Okay? And again, this is a little a deep concept. It takes some time to explain it, but I will just say in a simple way that when you in the dream, the mind that you have within the dream is different from the mind of the dreamer. It's not the same mind. Yesterday I mentioned, in the dream I may dream myself as a woman, but the dreamer is actually a man, right? So in this sense, the mind in the dream is what is called the individual mind in the dream world, but the dreamer who dreams is the universal mind, okay? Or the cosmic mind, in this for the dream reality. Now when we talk about this reality, I have my individual mind. I identify with this particular body and this particular mind. This is not the mind that created this world. This mind that calls itself Swami Kashi is not that which created this whole world. In this sense, we say there is what is called a cosmic mind. Sometimes people say this is God. What is God? It is the dreamer, but it is still not consciousness as it is. It is one level below, and this is what we call the cosmic mind. The cosmic mind is the dreamer, and on the cosmic mind level, yes, it is possible to make manifestations. On a individual mind, it is not possible.
I just want to ask Swami Kashi whether he thinks that it's possible for the world and all the humans in the world to self-realize if we have so many different religions going in so many different directions. I mean, basically they have the same direction, but they have different modes of attaining it. And do you think with all that babble, do you think, for example, that your way is the best way and that everybody should follow your way in order to achieve self-realization? Or how would you bring in other religions? Or do you have an ideal?
Only my way is right. Yeah, no. Well, first of all, you are asking if it is possible that everybody will be realized. Let's try to say something deep, okay, about it. There's no such a thing as everybody get realized. It is like saying, is it possible that everybody in my dream will know it is a dream? It is my dream, right? I am the dreamer. What is the meaning of other people in the dream knowing it is a dream or not knowing it, realizing the dream reality or not realizing the dream reality? There is only one dreamer. There is only one realization. That's a difficult one. But anyway, this is something to chew on. There is only one illusion. There is only one realization. Well, I'm a little teasing you because what I say is really what I think, but we need to give some background. On a mundane level, on a relative level, we cannot ignore the differences between people. We cannot ignore, I am a different person and you are a different person. I have my own memories, you have your own memories, etc. And from this point of view, Every person is either realized or not. But try to think for a moment from a standpoint of a realized being. Suppose we know what it means. Try to think from the standpoint of a realized being. Suppose, let's take Swami Shivananda. We all agree, hopefully, that he is a realized being. To be a realized being means not identifying anymore whatsoever either with the body and the mind. Swami Shivananda doesn't have the sense, I am Swami Shivananda, realized being in Rishikesh, helping the whole world with my grace. No. Being a realized being means realizing, Krishna says in the Gita, Vasudeva Sarvamitis Ramahatma Sudurlabhaha, realizing that all this is Vasudeva, all this is pure consciousness. This is the realization. The realization to realize there is only one pure consciousness. From that standpoint, where is the ignorance? Where is the non-realized? There is only realization. So only from an ignorant point of view, we talk about multiplicity, and one is ignorant, one is knowing. But from ultimate point of view, there is no such a thing. There is only one ignorant, there is only one realized.
So only through Vedanta you can get there, Swami?
Only through?
Through Vedanta you can get there, is this the only way?
No, of course not. You can, the Vedas already say, Ekam Sadbhahu Vedanti. The truth is one, but sages pronounce it in many different ways. Yesterday we have explained that truth cannot be expressed by words. If truth cannot be expressed by words, why my words should carry more weight than the words of a rabbi or the words of an imam? Or it is just another way to go wrong, right? So definitely there is no one way, and ultimately many spiritual traditions leads to that realization. They do it in a different ways, there are different stations, but realization must be one only.
Just to add to that, I think we need to shift our conception of it. Talk about ways to get there. In that we're assuming there is somewhere to get to. There is something to achieve or something to change. It's just in our language. And I think ultimately, there is nowhere to get to. In the end, it's about the letting go, the surrender, whatever it is, of all the stuff that is trying to get anywhere. And yeah, but I think, the very act of seeking puts us in a mindset which is taking us away from ourselves. So I think there's many, many different traditions, but I wouldn't say there's many different paths. There's many, many traditions, many different ways of pointing to the same, I wouldn't even call it a path, to that letting go. So I think they're all pointing to the same, but it's not about getting somewhere.
If I may add, the reason perhaps that so many religions exist and so many different masters come in different forms, in different countries, in different historical times, is because we human beings are so different. And, there's only one truth. There's only one knowledge. There are different means. Again, using the example of climbing a mountain, you can climb the southern route or the northern route or the east route or whatever it is. And they're all fine, but again, perhaps our ego mind starts comparing one with the other, say this is better than the other one. And my own experience is find one path and stick to it and see the results. And if that path doesn't really get you very far, you can change it. But I would say in the Western world today, we want instant gratification, instant everything. And if we don't get it, say, okay, this is no good, let me try something else. I would stick really to one path that perhaps has to do with our tradition, our upbringing, where we were born, etc., and see what happens. In my case, I gave up my sort of the way I was brought up as in a Christian tradition, and it was only after meditation I went back and I said, oh my goodness, this is really what was meant. And then I started discovering all these things in my own tradition that I had pushed away in my youth because, what one reason or another, they didn't really fit at the time. So I would say one path if possible, and see the results. And if it doesn't really work, okay, try another one. But let's stick with one path if possible. I'm sorry? Yes, there are some common elements between Christian prayer and meditation. They're not identical. In some of the courses I do in California, we actually talk about that. But it's not time to talk about that here. I can talk to you privately. There is some differences. Very briefly, in the case of prayer, you're asking God. In the case of meditation, you just are with God. Okay, so there is a subtle difference there.
So we'd like to thank very much Menes Kafatos, Swami Kashi Muktananda, and Peter Russell for this wonderful discussion. Let's give them a big hand.